Hey everyone, this is a quick video on overview of animation within Clip Studio Paint 1.12. It's intended for people who have a strong understanding of animation, and it's not a tutorial. I did speed up the video a little bit so that you can get to information as quickly as possible. People seem to prefer that for the overview videos. So the first thing that you want to do is make sure that your workspace is set up properly. Really the only key thing that you need to know about is underneath Window, you need to set up the timeline and animation cells. We'll go over both of those. So when you create your new file, underneath File New, you can select an animation type. It's not necessary. You can use an illustration, but if you do, it'll set up the timeline and the animation folder. It has preset sizes, and notice that these will have a blank area around them. You can adjust that or get rid of that underneath the blank space here and just set that to 0. This means that the area within the blue is what will render. Anything outside the blue rectangle will not render. So this is what your page will look like, and you've got the timeline as well as the animation folder and the background paper if you selected file with animation. As I said, I don't need to actually create an animation type, so here I'm going to use an illustration, and I'm going to choose a particular size for that, and it just brings up a normal layer like we're used to. So now we'll show you how to create those timelines in the animation folders. But the first thing, underneath animation, in the menu, we see that we have access to all different kinds of things, such as creating an animation folder and audio, things like that, as well as timeline. So all of these things get to the whole capabilities of animation, but we have buttons here that allow us to do it quickly and easily. So for example, we're going to create a new timeline. That's the first thing that you want to do. And it's going to bring up the parameters that you can set. So very quickly, you'll see that there are thumbnails here in the timeline, so you can turn those off by selecting thumbnail size and selecting none if you'd like. The zoom in and zoom out buttons allow you to determine how many frames that you're going to be able to display. The red marker shows you the current frame you're at, and the blue markers allow you to select the beginning and ending. Now I'm using EX, and so I have the ability to work with more than 24 frames. In Pro, you can have all of the capabilities, but you're limited to 24 frames. Most of the remaining buttons are fairly obvious, the transport buttons and then the loop button. Now the next one here is an important one, which is a new animation folder. So in Clip Studio Paint, basically the terminology that they use is that you've got cells within an animation folder. So an animation folder basically represents what might be called a layer in other programs. So after you've created a timeline, really the next thing that you want to do is create an animation folder. So we just click on that, and we see that we've got our folder here. And it shows up as an animation folder here. Now, this layer that we created, you can drag it in and out of folders. All of these layers are just like any standard layers within Clip Studio Paint, and so this one can be considered the background. And so we can go ahead and fill it with whatever color we want. We can even hide it so that you can see what you're working on. Now, with the background selected, you'll notice that none of these buttons are available because we're not within an animation folder. So I'm going to select an animation folder, and that allows us now to create new cells. And then we can make references to those cells. So that's the way that we're going to be working within Clip Studio Paint. Here's with onion skins. We'll talk more about these buttons in a second. And then we also have keyframes. So this is an important terminology distinction here, that the cells that we see may be considered keyframes in other animation software where you're actually doing frame-by-frame animation. So this right here, this set of buttons is about frame-by-frame animation. And the keyframes here, what they're really talking about is keyframes for doing transformations of your animation folder, being able to move it, scale it, or rotate it. So when you're ready to create your first drawing, it might be called a frame in other programs, but it's called a cell here. You want to click on this button to create a new animation cell. Of course, you could do it in the animation menu as well. Notice that it creates a layer underneath this folder, and it has an automatic name associated with it for one. Okay, so I can draw something in that frame. And now I can move over however many frames that I want and create another cell. Now notice here we've got a reference to 1. So it's telling us to put cell 1 here. I'm going to click on another cell, and of course it's created another layer here, and now I can draw something else there. Now, the next thing I want to show is when I create another cell, new animation cell, it will remember the spacing that I had before. So I click on here, and so that way I can animate on 2s or 3s or 4s or something like that. Creates a new cell, and again, I can just put in whatever I want there. Now, basically what you need to understand is that up here on the right are the layers, so we can select different layers, and if there's already a reference to the layers in the timeline, it will go to that location, but that's how we draw on the different layers. But in addition, once we've got the layer existing, we can create a reference to a same layer. So right now, we will hold 3 indefinitely, but now let's say that I want to show layer 1 there. So I just come to this one here that says Specify Cells, and I click on that, and I can click on any one of the layers. So there we select a layer 1, and we come back to layer 1. And so these are references to these cells that we've already created. Now I can go back here, for example, and I can delete that reference. So if I delete the reference, it says delete specified cell, but it doesn't really delete the cell, or rather the layer over here. It just deletes the reference. And so here we can see that we've removed it from the animation, but it hasn't gone away. So I can go back here and add it right back in if I want, just by specifying a cell and selecting it. So let's stop and think about this a little bit relative to some other programs. In a program like Krita, you may have all the details hidden. You're just creating keyframes. In a program like Moho, this is really considered to be like a switch layer is really what this is. Of course, we have the onion skins that we can turn on. If you're used to onion skins, you can change the values for that underneath the Show Animation Cells onion skin settings, and you can set how many of them there are, what coloring that you have for them, that kind of thing. Now, onion skins are valuable, but there's animation cells is actually the more valuable. It's like a white table, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Now I can cut and paste any of these references. I just drag over here and right-click and copy and paste them anywhere else I want in the timeline. So you can see now those have been copied back over. Now to show you that these are actual references to the same cell, here I'll delete this on layer 1 here, and we can see as I scrub along, it has been changed in all of these locations. Let's go ahead and clean up layer 2 as well, and just put a 2 on there so we've got 1, 2, 3 kind of thing like that. So I can adjust it in time by dragging, and then I can just press play, and we can see that we're testing the animation. Now that we've got a number of frames in our animation, let's look at keyframes. So I'm going to enable keyframes, but notice that that prevents me from drawing on the layer. So I'll move my marker to the first frame, and we'll set up a keyframe there by clicking on this Add Keyframe. And notice we get a blue diamond there. And now I'm just going to go to the Object tool, and now I can, let's resize, reposition, and rotate. Let's now go near the end and create another keyframe, and we will just take our tool, rotate it, and reposition. And finally, we'll go near the middle and reposition our frame here, and now we can walk through and see what is happening. When you're setting the keyframes, you can set the interpolation type here with this dropdown. However, once you've created the keyframes, you need to right-click to do that. So first of all, I want to make sure that I select the keyframe, and then I right-click. Notice the red border around there. I right-click on it, and now I can switch it to hold or linear. So I'm going to switch this one to hold, and notice that the color changes. I'm going to switch the next one to linear by right-click, switch to linear. Again, you can see a slightly different color here, and we can see the behavior with those animation changes. Now, if you want to get into fine-tuning, you can click on the graph editor, and that allows you to actually manipulate the keyframes with X, Y, or other, as well as you can change the position and scaling by hiding each individual channel if you want. One disappointing point about here is that these handles are not really, you can't really extend them to get that Bezier curve appearance. It really is just giving you the a little ability to change the angle here. Of course, you can select multiple keyframes and delete them with this button. You can deselect the enable keyframes in order to draw back on those cells, but they probably assume that you're going to leave that on once you've added some keyframes, so they've added another button here that allows you to just temporarily disable the keyframes so that I can update by editing, and then I can see those keyframes where they are, and then I can click on the button again to enable the keyframes again. These layers over here are just standard layers. You can add a new one. When you add a new one, it will assume that you're going to do an in-between, so it names it in between the two layers. Now, you can pull these layers in and out of the folder, but you need to pay attention to what you have references over here. So I'm going to turn off the keyframe, and you can see all the different references here. So let's, for example, take these and drag them out of the animation folder. Now you can see the areas which are missing those cells. But we'll just go in here, and I'm going to draw something, let's say a circle, around on this layer 1A. So I put a circle around that. I can merge this with the bottom layer. So let's select those and merge selected layers, making sure that I keep the name, and it will use the name of the first layer that you select. And I'm going to drag that back in. And now that key is popped back in. And since it's named the same thing, the reference isn't broken. And so we can see that it updates the animation. So now let's focus a little bit on audio. You can't add audio here in the toolbar, so you just go to the new animation layer and select audio. Notice that that creates an audio layer. So to actually add audio, we do File, Import, Audio. And then we can select whatever file we want. The audio track gives us a good way to show another thing, which is you can move these tracks. When I hover near the top where this double line is, my cursor turns to a hand, and I can grab the track and move it. And near the very beginning, there's a square, so I can change the starting point of that track. And same thing for the end. I can resize that. So here I have this explosion sound and match it up to the starting point. So if I have multiple audio clips, I would just do the same thing to add new audio tracks. We can also do 2D camera moves, and to show that I've brought in a background here, and we can see what it looks like without the camera move. We still have our animation looping up and down, and the background is not moving. So I'm going to go to the background layer, then select animation, new animation layer, 2D camera folder, and the things that are in that folder, just like the animation folder, you have to put the layers in that folder. The only layers that are affected by the camera move are the ones that are in that layer. So we want to have a camera move that will not affect this numeric animation, but will only affect what we see in the background. So I'm going to take the background and drag it underneath the camera. And now I'll select the camera and make sure that I've got the object tool selected. I will go to the first frame, and we will leave it fully exposed to see the entire background, and I will just click a keyframe, make sure that it's set on smooth interpolation, and we started the keyframe. And now we'll go somewhere around here. I'll just go to frame 19, and I will add a new keyframe and just zoom in a little bit here so that we're focusing on that tree. Now let's run the animation, and here's the result. So one other point to remember about the timeline is that I can turn off or enable the keyframes for independent layers. So notice it's enabled for this folder, but it's not enabled for the background. I can do the reverse. And so that way, if I'm working on complex animations, I can enable transformations independently. So let's now talk about the animation cells, which really might be called light table, because that's really what it's about, and it's a very powerful set of functions. So even though the animation cells are intended for doing animation, they can actually be used even for just standard illustration. And to show you that power, I'm going to go to this particular icon here, which says Select and Register File. So I'm going to click on that, and then I can select any file that I might want to import, as long as it's supported by Clip Studio. So for example, I might bring in a model sheet. Now, if your file doesn't come in, it's probably not supported by Clip Studio, even though it may look like it is. So for example, it could be a version for Mac if you're on Windows, or vice versa. But the real power of the light table is I can move layers around. So for example, right here, the layer that was imported, it wasn't imported as a normal layer. It was imported into this animation cells in a layer here. And this layer, if you see this light table on, it's a display for common light table for Canvas. So any other layer that I select on, I can see this. And using this light table tool, I can now just move this around and rotate it and resize it just like I would for any other layer. But the advantage is that if I have it already in the program, it won't affect that. I'll explain what that means in just a minute. So the point is, if I look at my animation, I can select any of these different cells, and the light table is still showing up, the sheet that's associated with the light table. Now that's because it is in this common area. Now I also have specific to cell. Now the difference between those two, I can just drag between them. So you can see right now I have cell number 1 selected, and I can see that light table. If I go to cell number 2, I can still see the sheet, and if I go to cell number 3, I can see it. Now if I move this model sheet into this section here, which is specifically for, it says specific to cell. I'm sorry, the tooltip is not coming up here, but it's specifically for whatever cell I had selected. So in this particular case, it's associated with cell 3. So when I go to cell 2, I don't see it, or cell 1, or cell 0. I only see it when it's there for cell 3. I can make that same thing available, but if I switch over here, I probably need to move it to the common area first, and then I could make it available for 2. But that's what the common area is for, if I want to be able to see it for multiple cells. So let's notice a couple of things right now. I have this display light table specific to cell, and that's for this particular layer. Notice if I disable that, it goes away. And this other one is for the common area, and you can see by disabling that. And so that's how you can keep track of what's going on. The light table is enabled. If I turn this off, we don't see the light table sheets, and when I turn them on, I can see it. Now, I can put any number of sheets down in either one of these sections. I can also change the opacity associated with that, with the sheets, and I can change the color. But to change the color, I have to select the sheet first. So for example, here, I can go in here and I can change it to monochrome, and the default color is a bluish kind of color, but I can change that to some other color. So if I wanted it to be a red kind of color, for example. Now we talked about we can resize, we can move, we can rotate, we can do all these kinds of transformations, typical to Clip Studio Paint. We can also flip, both horizontally and vertically, and if we click here, we can reset everything to its original position. Now these other buttons are more directly related to the cells that we're animating, so I can lock a particular animation cell, I can move up and down between these animation cells, and I can create a new animation cell. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new one, number 4 here, and show you something else. But first, let me get rid of this model sheet, and to do that, I just go here where it says deregistered a selected image. Now I'll just show that we can use the standard cells as references in the light table. So for example, if we're doing a number 4, it's fairly similar to a 1, so we might want to have that as a reference sheet. So, but I only want it for number 4, I don't want it for 3 or 2. So I'm going to turn off the common display, and I'm going to drag, so notice that I don't have layer 1 selected, that's important to know. And so I'm going to drag a different layer. So layer 4 is selected, I'm going to drag a different layer into this specific to cell area. Now notice it's showing 4 and 1, and notice that the icon is showing it's editing. So I'm editing layer 4, but I have the light table for layer 1. Now again, I could move it around and change its shape and all that kind of thing, or I can just go ahead and draw, so with the 4, and I could copy, but that's just to show you what's happening with these light table sheets. All right, so that's the end of the overview of animation within Clip Studio Paint 1.12, specifically focusing on the timeline window and the animation cells. If you go to the animation menu, there are a couple more things like snapping and things like that, but those are fairly self-explanatory. If you're using a light table, don't forget to deregister things to free up resources. And of course, you can have multiple animation folders. So for example, you might have an ink layer and a coloring layer and things like that, a sketch layer initially. But you can add and delete those just as easily as you would normal layers. I hope that's a helpful overview for you, and enjoy animating within Clip Studio Paint 1.12.